Great, I want to welcome everyone to the March 21st. March is almost done already. March 21st, 2024 meeting of the Seattle Design Commission. Our meetings are held in person and they're also recorded on WebEx for later posting on our website along with the project presentation in a minute. From 10 until noon today, we have a two-part presentation from the Bitterlake team, one finalizing our review of the reservoir component of the project, and then also getting a presentation relative to a preferred option for the park portion of the larger Bitterlake site. And then in the afternoon, we have a extended commission business meeting from about noon until 2. Why don't we go ahead and start with introductions of commissioner and then the project team and anyone from the public. And I think that there aren't members of the public today. I'm not aware, we were asking before you guys came in about whether or not members of the public would be joining either online or in person. We haven't heard, but we do monitor to make sure if anyone does log in that we provide them with an opportunity for public comment. And same way for receiving. Sounds good. So Commissioner, why don't we start with introductions and then introductions by the design team. For part of this record, I do want to indicate that we do have a presenter who Kate Clark, who's part of the Seattle Design Commission now. It's it's a little unusual for us, but the point being is that Kate had previous contract relationships with Seattle Public Utilities before she started. We're disclosing that today. Kate will be more than happy to talk about it if that's an issue for anybody, but I think we're fine on the situation. And I just wanted to disclose that today for the record. So, Commissioners, if you could introduce yourself and describe or indicate your role on it.
Yep. Good morning. I'm Phoebe Bogert, Landscape Architect Commissioner.
Jill Curry, at-large Commissioner.
Good morning. Brian Markham, Engineering Commissioner.
Ben Gist, Architect Commissioner.
Good morning. Kevin O'Neill, Transportation Planning Commissioner.
Zubin Rao, also Architect Commissioner.
And we have one commissioner joining us online today. Molly, could you introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm Molly Spitalnik. I'm the Urban Design Commissioner.
Thanks, Molly. And I'm Michael Jenkins, Design Commissioner.
Valerie Keenest, Staff Division.
Juliet Acevedo, staff.
Are you going to lead us with introductions or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'll go ahead
I'll
and
put you on the spot.
introduce myself and then lead it to our team. So I'm Andy Carson. I'm with Seattle Public Utilities. I'm the project manager for the Bitterlake Reservoir Improvements Project. So next, I'll introduce Bill Wells. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Bill Wells. I'm with SBU in the Water System Planning Group.
Then we also have, I think online, we have Eugene Manchev, who's with SPU as well. He's in Bill's group. You want to introduce yourself, Eugene?
Yes, good morning. I'm Eugene Manchev. I'm Water Line of Business representative on this project.
And then with Seattle Parks and Recreation, we have Kevin Bergeron.
Right. Kevin Bergeron, Senior Park Planner. And then also the consultant, the retired consultant team led by Aaron Luoma.
Yep, Aaron Luoma, Landscape Architect with HBB, representing both the design team with SPU as well as Seattle Parks and Rec.
And we also have with Becky.
Becky Johnson, I'm a public art project manager, the PM for this project, the arts component.
And our planning artist is Kate Clark.
Hi, I'm Kate Clark. I'm here as the planning artist. There are no other planning artists involved with the project, which is why I'm here.
And then our consultant with Consor is Leo Alderman.
And Lyle Alderman, I'm the Senior PM at Consor and for SPU on the reservoir portion of the project.
And two other quick things before we begin. Forgot to recognize Wendy. Sorry for not calling you out. Wendy Vandekar is a staff person on the commission. She's joining us online.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Can everyone please turn on your cameras? I'm hard of hearing and it helps me to link up what lips are doing with what the sounds I hear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Kevin is going to be taking the action. With that, I will mute myself and throw it to you, Andy.
That's great. Cool, our presentation always. Turn it so that when you can see my face when I'm speaking up here.
Yep.
All right, so thank you for the opportunity today to present our Bitterlake Reservoir Improvements Project. So our presentation will go over the recommendations that we received from the Design Commission and how we are addressing these recommendations from our 60% design. And also we will provide the concepts for the park concepts. So from our 60% schematic design, there were 7 recommendations that came from the Design Commission. We have summarized those 7 recommendations into 5 themes here that we'll be going over today. So these are community engagement and input, landscape design and pedestrian circulation, art integration, lighting and security, and structural considerations. Throughout the presentation, we'll be talking about these themes to address your earlier comments. So taking a look at the project scope, budget, and maintenance. So for the reservoir project, our scope entails the design and construction of a new 21 million gallon pre-stressed concrete reservoir. That includes all the required appurtenances for that, and we'll be replacing the existing reservoir that's out there. Our project budget is $90 million. Taking a look at our operations and maintenance out there, currently we have an existing reservoir, so all the operations and maintenance is in place. There are some changes between the projects. So with the existing, we have a floating cover that will no longer need to be maintained. And there are some stormwater pumps that go along with that that will not need. Also, there are some recirculation pumps within the reservoir, which will be abandoned. But with the new reservoir, we'll have mixers within the reservoir, and then we'll have some stormwater facilities that we need to maintain. But we'll be able to use the same resources that we do have to maintain those facilities. So now Kevin was going to give introductions to scope, budget, and maintenance for the parks project.
Sure. So for the Seattle Parks part, we hired HPV to look at developing a conceptual plan, doing public engagement in and around the park, and then coming up with a schematic grading plan that we will transmit to Seattle Public Utilities later this year in the next couple of months. And part of that is that Seattle Parks budget is $200,000 for this effort. The other part is that covering is that due to the long construction time frame, Seattle Parks would not be coming back on site to make park improvements until probably 2029. And so we're looking at that 6 will be engaging another consultant to actually do the final design. And that fits in with the Seattle Park District budgeting of $500,000 thereabouts in two stages to fund that design and also take it through construction. The one thing I will add is that the engagement that happened, we'll be covering it shortly. So since HPD was part of it and also Consor, there was a lot of coordination between Parks project and also Seattle Public Utilities project.
So to get everybody up to date on the schedule of where we're at, so reaching the end of March right now, and that puts us, we're delivering 90% designs for the reservoir in May, and then we'd be providing final designs in late spring, early summer of 2025, with the project going to bid the later half of 2025, with groundbreaking happening with dry weather in 2026. And as Kevin noted, the construction is slated for 2.5 to 3 years, at which point we have a year closeout period for warranties, etc. SPR, the Parks group right now, they are wrapping up conceptual designs. Aaron will talk about that in depth on the next slide, but as the design and construction for the reservoir will take place over the next several years, Parks has split up their design and funding to kind of coincide with the length of construction, and then hopefully tie up with construction when we're closing out ours. And then finally, our other major partner in the project, Arts, we are now wrapping up the planning artist work, which we'll get into later in the slides as well, where we will be transitioning to a public artist. And then we are collaborating with those designs at the 90% deliverable for any major foundations or improvements or land work that needs to happen to incorporate that in. So we're only moving ideally the soil once, for the reservoir project to incorporate into the arts project.
Thanks, Leo. And so for the park schedule, this is unchanged from November, but it just shows you where we're at today. For new commissioners, the parks schedule in more detail. We started in August, and we had a couple of periods of community engagement to listen to the community, develop some 3 concepts, which you'll see later on today, and then working currently towards a preferred concept, which you'll see today as well. And then we'll be able to take your feedback from today and incorporate that into a schematic level 30% design that we'll deliver to parks towards the end of April. And the real sweet spot here is coordinating that design and the grading with SPU that's concurrently working on their 90% design. And then all at the same time, as Leo mentioned, we're collaborating with Kate on developing earthwork land art ideas, as well as reserving areas within the park site for other art opportunity areas for future public artists to do work as well.
So to set the context of where the project is located, we are in the northwest portion of the city of Seattle, just a few blocks shy of the city's shoreline. We have North 143rd Street to the north of us, Linden Avenue north to the east, and then North 138th Street to the south. There's also a private drive that's along the west. We have the Bitterlake Community Center that's to the southeast of the project with its large playing fields, and then also I-5 further east, and then as you get closer in, Highway 99 Aurora Avenue north. This is the existing site here, northeast perspective, so you can see to the right, or on the directly north there, that's the community garden pea patch area. And then as we wrap around to the east, that is existing park playground, kind of an open meeting area. And then as on the east of the site there, where we're along Linden Avenue, there's an existing SPU pump station and operations storage yard. And you can see the existing reservoir is built up as an earthen basin on all sides, and with a floating cover on top of it right now to protect water quality. And that will all be removed as part of this project. So a bit on site constraints and opportunities. As we noted, there is city right-of-way on 3 sides of the project, and then to the north, that's on the, to the west, sorry, that's on the bottom of the sheet. That is Fremont Street North, private residences, and Pleasant Street there. We do currently have the site is fully secured. That's the large dashed line. It's security fencing installed by SPU, but we will now be removing that as part of this project and opening up the space for public use. We do have large elevation gains that have caused concerns for accessibility in the future coming up from the roadway grade to the maintenance access road around the reservoir over 30 feet. And then we also need to be sure with the removal of that fence that we're also improving the water storage security as well as the seismic survivability of the water storage facility. So to take a step back from some work that we completed in 2021, and then even talk about some work that was done by SPU at a highly conceptual phase back in the late 2010s. We are aware that this is a unique site that offers unique opportunities to the city. It's very rare that you would have a 14-acre parcel with new dedicated public open space become available in the city. I want to note that SPU has been a thoughtful, collaborative, and intentional partner about the design of this new critical infrastructure and the space being provided to the city and to the Bitterlake community. So highly conceptual work that began in 2018-17 by SPU. The early outreach efforts we had then, that was before even Consor was brought onto the project. But SPU learned that both the neighborhood and local law enforcement were not interested in having a fully buried reservoir here. Like similar locations that SPU has water storage facilities that are fully buried, you can't plant trees or shrubbery on top of the reservoir because potential harm to the structure in the future. And so neighbors saw this as a high potential area for what they were already seeing as a large number of encampments on this property. And law enforcement agreed that with the difference in elevation from the street to the top of that reservoir at plus 40 feet when the structure is complete, this would not be an easily patrolled area. So there was concern for just creating a large potential campground on top of this reservoir. And then there was also concerns if we were to fully bury this, that there would be accessibility concerns, in particularly for the senior housing that's directly across Linden Avenue from the reservoir site. So this right here is a snapshot of the work that Consor did with SPU in 2021. We wrapped it up. All this information, as well as costing, life cycle cost analysis, operations, helped to inform SPU's selection of option 3, partially buried circular pre-stressed concrete reservoir. And not only because of its state-of-the-art construction and its proven seismic resilience, it was also a lower cost and a higher value to its ratepayers versus option 4's standard reinforced concrete reservoir option. And also, if you could see from all the other options, it's the smallest footprint for the storage reservoir, which actually opened up the site more for future amenities, potentially creating a large campus for providing varied topography, extensive opportunities for planting native species, perhaps expanding the community garden, improving accessibility for all ages and abilities, as well as improving sight lines for facility security and neighborhood safety. It's important too to talk about some of the engineering considerations and constraints that went in as we moved from the options analysis of option 3 and into actual hard designs. What we wanted to do was optimize the tank location of the site, not only to open up the site for as much open space, but we also need to look at minimizing excavation needs. There's approximately 50,000 cubic yards of material that needs to be excavated from this site, including removal of the existing berm and reservoir. And so by locating a majority of the new reservoir within the existing reservoir basin, we were able to minimize initial soil quantities. And so that goes along with balancing the cut and the fill quantities. That provides additional soil that may be used for land art opportunities. And I think very important, it reduces the hauling and the truck traffic through that neighborhood. Also, with regards to the sizing and the configuration of the reservoir, SPU, in order to meet their system-wide water storage requirements, they need to maintain the existing 21 million gallons of storage on this site. And we've talked about it over our last few meetings, but I think it's worth noting for some of the new commissioners. We've heard the comment, well, can't we just push the reservoir down into the site to obscure it even further? But in order for there to be reliable customer water service pressure and to meet minimum drinking water standards for the tank service area, the typical operating water level in the new tank must be the same level as it is in the existing tank. Additionally, I think it's important to know if we did move forward with lowering the tank, again, wouldn't work hydraulically, but know that 1 foot of excavation equals 3,000 cubic yards of material on the site that would have to be hauled or used otherwise.
Thank you, Lael. So the next bulk of the presentation is really to discuss the landscape design and pedestrian circulation. We kind of lumped these together. And I'm going to go a little bit out of order from the comments that you wrote up from November, mostly just because chronologically that's how we looked and addressed them. So as a reminder, at 30% to 60% to today, this is just a snapshot of SPU's site development progression, incorporating your feedback at each meeting. One of the key comments that we got back in November was questions, concerns, comments regarding SPU security fence. We had developed some initial ideas of perhaps enhancing that fence. Kate will talk about that later, but there's concerns about just the pedestrian experience, the scale, the perception of that fence if you're near it. And so one of the first things we did right after that November meeting was, let's just push this viewpoint path, the circular path around the reservoir out away from the fence. And we're still able to create an accessible route of 4.5% or less. And we're still able to get 14 feet higher than the reservoir maintenance road. That fence will still be a part of the design, certainly, but the scale and the perception of it, I think, is going to be a lot different now. And we're still able to achieve that kind of circular viewpoint and kind of this rewarding experience up at the top. And so this is SPU's current site plan that shows the 4 bioretention cells that kind of swirl around the reservoir. and that viewpoint path. These are some sections that remain unchanged from the last time, but just for newer commissioners especially, or as a reminder, the scale and proportion of this partially buried reservoir in relationship to the entire parcel in width, cutting east and west and north and south, as well as the elevation it sits relevant to adjacent buildings and development to the north and south and east and west. And I mentioned at the schedule, this is kind of really the sweet spot where we're kind of coming together at this point now. This is just a snapshot of SPU's preliminary draft grading that's in the works, working towards 90%. That's incorporating this viewpoint path and maintaining and keeping all of this fill on site. And then we're going to be continuing to refine this to incorporate parks design as well as the potential or the land art element that Kate will speak to. This is just a snapshot of SPU's design as it stands now with that pedestrian circulation that wraps around the reservoir, these 4 bioretention cells, the security fence that wraps around the SPU's maintenance vehicular area. And then there are some right-of-way improvements and sidewalk improvements on the north and south and east that we've spoken to in the past. Those remain unchanged. Before jumping further into the parks part of the project, when we left you mid-November last year, we were still in the midst of our first round of community engagement. So we had some initial ideas and feedback that we shared with you then, but I do want to kind of take time now to summarize what we heard in November. And that was really just a visioning time where we took a whole month about to have a focus group meeting with residents and neighbors. We had a public open house. And that was a chance just to listen of what they wanted this new park space to be without showing them any designs, just showing them the possibilities with imagery, different types of amenities. And we heard concerns that are similar to what SPU has heard in the past as well, about safety and visibility, concerns about noise, and especially the privacy of the neighbors to the immediate west along that private road, knowing that this is going to be a new park space that will dramatically change their experience, but we're going to keep that SPU security fence along that west side at their request. Some preferred activities and programming, generally there was a sense of more passive recreation. They weren't interested in large athletic fields or a lot of active recreation. It was wanting to see loop paths and walking paths, lots of trees, expanding the pea patch, expanding the playground, having gathering spaces for the community. The Bitterlake Community Center just to the south has an kind of enclosed building for community gathering and active recreation. They have athletic fields, tennis courts, pickleball, a new restroom and playground that's being built and worked on right now. So they, wanted a sense of kind of different amenities than were just offered to the south. We also had an online survey that really was a lot of the same similar themes that came out of that engagement. Some concerns about safety, questions about lighting and if that was proposed. Again, kind of the highest scored activities were really more focused on passive recreation. There was definitely some interest in some multi-sport courts potentially that were maybe different than what was offered at Bitterlake Community Center to the south. So after that period of engagement, this is kind of end of November, we took your feedback, we took all of that community's feedback, and before we jumped into developing 3 different concepts, we wanted to return to this story that we wanted to tell, that we showed this graphic to you in November, and really that we've been inspired by this site because of its power to communicate how the reservoir is collecting water from the Tolt Reservoir and then redistributing it to the community. And then the stormwater aspect, there's a collection of stormwater that falls on site that's being treated through bioretention cells and eventually injected back into a deep aquifer. So there's kind of a collection of water and a redistribution of water. And we wanted to tell that story through the site design, holistically, kind of bigger vision, but also we want to be able to tell that story in more minute detail as well later on. So we began with just kind of the bigger programmed amenities that the public wanted to see in the park space. And we began to kind of bubble out and diagram where those best fit on site. How much room do they really need to take up? You know, certain amenities, they need a certain amount of square footage to really have value and make sense. We looked at just constraints in terms of topography, and making sure we have all these spaces as accessible as possible. Adjacencies, understanding that, playgrounds right next to off-leash areas maybe are not the best kind of situation, but pea patches next to playgrounds is something that, there's some kind of mutual benefit there. So we just diagrammed those out. And then as you all, as designers, are well aware of and practice on your own, we began just kind of sketching out, okay, if these are some of these amenities, how are they connected through accessible networks of paths, developing a hierarchy of paths, all while incorporating SPU's layout as well. And we just continue to refine that with additional sketches, studies, explorations of things that worked well, things that didn't work well. And we wanted to develop 3 concepts that had some similarities, but also some unique differences, and kind of expressed and exhibited a broad range, that they're not too identical. And we further refined those concepts. And then we wanted to make sure that the public was aware when we produced additional graphics for the second round of engagement, that we had imagery so that they understood, especially for those who English was not their first language, they had imagery to understand when we say or labeled something a dog off leash area, they knew and understood what that we meant by that. Or if we meant, informal walking path or trail, they had a vision of what that could be. So we developed just some simple image boards. This was one, this was another one that just showed examples of what these spaces and amenities could be, not specific designs, but just inspiring images so they could connect plan to image. And then we developed 3 concepts, and I know you've seen these in the packet, but I'm going to walk you through each one in detail, and then we'll jump into the engagement that we did as well. So the first concept we titled Whirl. This is kind of a lighter approach, more of a minimal approach in terms of amount of amenities and development on site. The first thing that we did was locate an off-leash area to the south of the reservoir. We've, in talking to the community in the focus group, felt like this would be a really good sort of program space that would bring lots of people during all times of the day, all season long, all week long, to a space that we knew was going to be challenging in terms of visibility and activating that space on the south side. We also know that lots of people already bring their dogs and walk, some off leash, to the space very near here in the south east corner. We kept the existing pea patch as is, and we just simply expanded that to the north there. I'm going to see if my cursor shows up. It's a little lagging, so I'll maybe not use that too much. But and then we worked with Kate to understand, okay, if we're going to do a land art, what's kind of the minimum size that would have value to do that? And so we located that near the viewpoint, kind of wrapping around that viewpoint. And then we have some open lawn areas and a picnic shelter for events, kind of located between the viewpoint, the land art, and the pea patch. We have some smaller plaza spaces with better park entries to the northeast corner. And then we have some smaller fitness and interpretive nodes. There's some existing exercise equipment in the park already, and so we thought that that would be an added value there. The existing playground, its space is kept there adjacent to the pea patch on the north side, but we more than doubled its size adjacent to it. By the time, working with Kevin, by the time this park is constructed, the life cycle of that existing equipment is probably on its way out. And so we might be able to keep the space as is, but likely there'll be new equipment ready to go at that time anyways. In all concepts, we included a buffer along the west edge. And this was just to be able to be sensitive to those neighbors that have had a lot of concerns about noise and visibility into the park, and provide a sort of a transition between that single family housing to the park space. In all concepts, we want to highlight the accessibility of the space because that's a challenge in the topography, but it's also lends itself to really unique opportunities as you navigate the entire site, in particular around SPU's looped path here. And this shows just all the accessible routes that you could take at 4.5% or less. The next concept we called flow. This is a little bit more intensive development of amenities and a network of paths. On the south side, something different here was introduce a nature play, an outdoor classroom with some fitness areas as well adjacent to that in the southeast corner. This was an amenity we heard of some interest from the community to be able to have more trees and more forested areas there to the south. We have a larger plaza in the northeast corner to really welcome people in on that. The current one is really small. It's kind of hard to even see into the existing park space on that northeast corner. We, again, keep the existing P-patch, but we expand it on the north side. In this case, we move the play area closer up to the viewpoint in thinking that there'd be some slope play, slides on berms and things like that. And we increase its size. We have a staircase from Linden that comes up. In all concepts, we do want to encourage and promote this idea of a mid-block crossing that actually is perpendicular to city right-of-way there, but it just dead ends into our site. And instead of forcing residents on Linden to go all the way around to the corners, we want to encourage a mid-block crossing that can activate kind of this middle part of the site on the east side. We did include some sand volleyball or smaller courts off Linden just to introduce this idea of maybe something different that's non-existing at the Bitterlake Community Center to kind of gauge the community's interest in that. And then we include that buffer along the west edge. Also mentioned we included a food forest adjacent to the P-patch. This was something we heard from the focus group. Some of the existing P-patch users are really excited about this opportunity and feel like they could champion its ownership and its maintenance similar to the food forest that's on Beacon Hill. Here's the accessible network here. The last concept is the most extensive in terms of the approach. In this case, the land art opportunities, we just wanted to show something different. And here we showed it kind of stretching from the northeast corner all the way to the southwest corner, just to see what the community thought of that, hearing Kate's thoughts afterwards, after we've had some time to kind of mull that over, has been helpful. In this case, we have an entirely new P-patch. And the only reason to do that was to see if the community was open to it first, but also the existing P-patch is not accessible. So to make the entire thing accessible, we'd really have to redo all of it. And so this was just a test, it was just to kind of gauge interest to see if the community was open to that idea. We have a grander staircase off of Linden. In the southeast corner, there's an existing stormwater pond there that we really cannot do much with because of how much stormwater we have to retain on site and infiltrate. And it's one of the few existing spaces that already serves that purpose. So we can't do a lot with that, but it's a corner of the park. And it's where a lot of people coming from the south will enter the park, coming from the Bitterlake Community Center. I talked to a lot of people through this last round of engagement where they weren't even aware that there was an existing park up here because they were just a block or so away. And so we want to have a better inviting corner in that southeast corner instead of kind of going down this cul-de-sac. So this idea includes an elevated boardwalk over this existing stormwater facility, an accessible entrance that would be an amenity in a feature in and of itself, but really draw people into the park on that corner. We included a couple multi-purpose hard surface sport courts on this option off of Linden there to the east. And then we also included a maintenance access drive from the southwest corner, thinking that we want to enlarge this entrance a little bit better, have better connections east and west, and make that entrance to the park in the southwest corner better, more inviting, as well as serve as mutual purpose of just potential SPU and well as parks maintenance access. So it's not limited to just the one access point off of Linden. Here's the accessible routes on that. So this is a slide we could return to perhaps during discussion or comments, but it just shows all three at once and bullets out some of the kind of the unique attributes between the two. And again, you can see there's a lot of similarities. That's partially on purpose. And we fully expected that during the community engagement when we talked with people, we weren't expecting that we're just going to pick one of these and go with it. It was always going to be this sort of combined effort. What did you like and didn't like of each of these? So that chronologically leads us to kind of the beginning of February after some intense planning. And we worked on the community engagement, kind of a second round of input we developed these three concepts, these image boards, and wanted to come to the community and ask them for their feedback. And this was a really exciting time that we partnered with Arts and SBU for a collaborative effort. This was, we understood that from the community's perspective, they are going to see this as one project. It's the city doing something. It's not three separate departments. And so we took lessons learned from the prior engagement phases on terms of what worked well, what didn't work well. And in this case, we took the whole month of February to have an online open house and a survey, fairly traditional in that sense, where we had combined materials for parks, SPU, and arts on that open house and survey. And then we had a number of events where we went to the community where they already were, where we knew where they were going to have an event, like a pancake breakfast or the food bank or certain businesses or certain residents, and we just went to them. We coordinated with those owners and just set up times. And in some cases, it was door to door even, or just a tabling event mid-February where we were just out at the park on a weekend and interacted with lots of people walking their dogs and with kids and things like that. We also had a focus group meeting again with a lot of those same focus group members from the first round of engagement in November. City Council member Moore also attended that event, which was great to get their support from council to be able to weigh in and know that this was a really important project. So these are just a few of the images. We have a lot of just the different events that we did, interacting with a real diverse age group, ethnicities, and we had a lot of social media interaction during that time that was developed by all the city departments. We had 1,800 unique users for the online open house, over 360 people attending these in-person events. And the survey had a good number of people as well respond to that. And there's a current project website that's still up. In addition to all of that, we still knew that we were going to not be able to reach every people group, every community member. And so SPU worked with several community liaisons that were really entrenched into their community, that understood and knew not only just the languages, but also had a network already of friends and neighbors within their respective people groups. And we worked with them to send them the materials. All the materials were translated in different languages, and they reached out to separate businesses, separate religious congregations to receive feedback on the park's concepts, which was really good to just collect that more qualitative feedback where people were more comfortable just having a conversation, you know, not filling out a survey and ranking things 1 through 5, but they just wanted to talk about the project, understand it better. These are some of the numbers that we kind of collected and summarized through this engagement period. I think it's really interesting to see how 63% of the online open house were residents of Seattle. That tells you how important this project is going to be to city of Shoreline residents that are just to the north that will likely use this space. We had a lot of good use through mobile device. Again, all the materials online and the materials physically printed were in different languages. The survey feedback, you know, you can see kind of the rating system out of 5. You know, it's not super consequential of exactly what concept was the winner here, and that's okay. It was better to see the feedback that we got out of each of those 3 of what they liked and didn't like. But also considering, you know, the flow concept, you know, certainly was the highest rated. But overall, the qualitative feedback that we got, just having conversations, writing down notes, sharing with them the concepts that SPU has developed and parks, that was, I think, the most valuable in terms of just understanding that they did really appreciate the walking paths and trails. They really wanted to see lots of trees in the park. They didn't want to see just only grass. They wanted the existing pea patch to remain. That was really clear. They weren't willing to kind of redo that part, but they wanted to expand the pea patch still. They wanted to expand the play area. There was still a lot of support for the food forest idea, generally wanting to see benches and picnic tables. They were really interested in the land art opportunities and incorporating that with, you know, how kids might interact with that land art, and Kate will speak more to that later. They really liked this idea of this viewpoint path, as well as the elevated boardwalk. So we took all of that feedback and we worked with Consor and Kate, and we just sat down and shared stories of we all attended different events, and we just shared stories of what we've heard from the community, what we were seeing in the survey in terms of the quantitative feedback, but mostly just kind of talking about what we had heard, and started to kind of prioritize what were these big amenities that we saw that we wanted to include in the preferred concept. And this is something that we're still actively working on now. Some of those big things we saw were having open access points from Linden, you know, really improving that access into the park on the east side. Having a gathering space to have larger community events on a hard surface in that northeast corner. Think things like food trucks or festivals, something that might be related to music, dancing. There was a lot of support for this off-leash area. Accessible loop path around the entire reservoir was something people were really interested in. Working with Kate and understanding that for the land art, it's going to be better if it's more contiguous instead of fragmented and broken up. And so we took that to mind. Having multi-purpose shelter spaces, not only for pea patch users, perhaps to collect produce, clean, wash it, perhaps, but also have barbecues and community events. Mentioned keeping and expanding that pea patch, the food forest. When we reached out to the SHAG and some of the senior apartment complexes and just talking with the elderly, there was, I think, in addition to the accessible paths, there was an interest of like, what else is there for us? Are there certain amenities that could be really specifically catered towards us and that people group, that age group? Included an integrated nature play near the play area with the pea patch, integrating fitness areas and perhaps some active sports, but just have it be very secondary. So we took all that feedback and we developed this preferred concept. Again, this is a draft, and a part of just the purpose of today's meeting is really to kind of get your feedback on this. It's something we're actively working on right now. We're working with Consor to begin some of the engineering aspects of it, this 30% and the cost estimate, and we'll just continue to be working on that through the month of April. So the feedback we receive today will be really valuable. But you can see here, starting on the south, we have this off-leash area that's potentially able to split for large dogs and small dogs, knowing that that's often a benefit because of the size, being able to attract more people to that space. We have a maintenance access road still, but it serves dual purposes as just having a larger inviting space in that southwest corner with still accessible paths to get up to the main SPU reservoir loop path. We have an elevated boardwalk that's accessible in the southeast corner that kind of coincides to a switchback accessible path and stairs to get up to that loop path around the reservoir. That might be a interest in a destination. Off of Linden, we have a space here where it's specifically for maybe more elderly activities, senior age, where we have potential room for a bocce ball or ping pong or other table games with benches, a space that could be a little bit quieter, removed from the playground and the activity of those kids. So it might serve a different demographic there. We have that mid-block crossing off of Linden with a staircase that's running parallel with that up to the reservoir path. We have a small nature play area that's number 15, or kind of a nature education area. That's number 15 there off of some stairs. And then the land art is, again, more contiguous, and we're going to be working with Kate even next week on just refining that shape and kind of understanding where that should go exactly. But it's going to generally be around this viewpoint area, and there's an opportunity to have this sort of sinuous, accessible path from the play area, that's kind of the maroon color, up to the viewpoint, because we've talked with Kate about just not only being able to see the land art from the viewpoint from above and the plaza from below, but also interact with it and walk through it. And so that shape and that will be refined further. We have this picnic shelter number 12 that serves dual purposes for both kind of pea patch use, but also kind of open community gatherings in this open lawn. We envision, there could be events where people are sitting on this lawn as a natural amphitheater, maybe outdoor movies or other festival types of features. We do keep that existing pea patch and we just expand it. I think we at least double its size. And then we include the food forest, but we kind of shifted it a little bit south just to try to activate that area that's behind the reservoir on that west, so that we're minimizing kind of any area that's just a path. So we have kind of amenities with the off-leash area, and the food forest is close to that kind of area that's a little bit harder to see from certain parts of the project site. We do have this larger open plaza in the northeast corner. We included a basketball court, or at least a size for that, because that's a feature that doesn't exist at the Bitterlake Community Center outside. It does occur inside, but it could be other hard surface sort of active space, but it's kind of separated from this plaza so that you could have two different sort of groups of people doing different things. The play area is brand new, and it's kind of shifted a little bit to the south, and kind of one area that's a little bit flatter where we could have different equipment, and then one area that's a little bit shaded there. Number 11 is specifically for sloped play because it's on a slope. Accessibility wise, we're able to really increase the amount of area that's accessible. This is new to your packet. We just overlaid it. And this highlights also, I think we're excited about this accessible loop path in blue. It's 1/3 of a mile. So there's no stairs, and you could run or walk this path, 3 times to get your miles. And this idea of kind of circumventing the reservoir along this and having potential signage that could tell people about that. And with that, I'll pass it off to Becky.
Just kind of give a brief update about the art integration before I hand it over to Kate is, we've been working with Kate since about this time last year, and we also been working with SP since before 30% to really make sure that we can integrate the artwork and whatever we propose versus just kind of plopping something in and telling the community what they want. And so Kate's original scope of work was to do community engagement and take that community engagement and think about what kind of public art opportunities could go within that space. But since we heard from the design commission last time that we wanted to see Kate maybe in a more expanded role to think more about the site topography within the design team, along with maybe the fencing opportunities and how that can continue to develop. We took that feedback to our public art advisory committee and they agreed. So since then, we've created an expanded role for Kate for design only to work with the team, to work on site topography, that land art, and then also thinking about the fencing if there's opportunities there for design enhancements. And all those features would then be included within the design packet that would come from both teams. So that's where we've come this far, but I'd like to think about Kate and let her talk about where she's at today, the work she's been doing.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, so my role in this project, as Becky mentioned, is sort of threefold. Started out in doing a lot of community engagement to get feedback on how and where and why people want Percent for Art projects to be placed in the park, and then to work with arts and the project team to identify areas within the site that artworks funded by the Percent for Art could go, and then to craft those calls with arts. And then, as Becky mentioned, my role has expanded then to really work more closely with the team in these design enhancements. And as Erin mentioned, the first image that you see here is sort of what we have is the area highlighted for potentially where the land art could go, and then the encircled area for the fence. Because of the unique opportunities of where the placement and reservoir type, as Lael mentioned, we have the most possibility for elevation change in play. And so with focusing where the land art is in that north corner that kind of activates the diagonal, we then have an opportunity for the playground activities to kind of extend up into the hillside through informal play on those slopes. And then of course the fencing we're still in the process of learning about what's feasible to essentially make that prefab estate style fencing a more friendly experience. But as was mentioned before, with the suggestion from the Seattle Design Commission of pulling out that pathway, it is buffered more by vegetation. So thinking more of ways to kind of make it, to kind of build on that feeling of buffering it with color treatment potentially for the fence is the direction we're going to go. So there was a question, if you could change to the next slide, about what we meant by land art. So I just wanted to show you a few examples. If you haven't been to Johnson Pit number 30, it's in this area. It's actually a great example of ways that you can contour earth. And so this opportunity to do this sort of feeds two birds with one seed through using some of that excess soil that Lael mentioned, as well as providing more community activity and engagement, which was something that was the highest priority that people mentioned that they wanted to occur on the site. Another thing too to think about is, of course, this type of a treatment is the most fun in the summertime for play and rest, though early on, lots of people were saying when they heard that all of this new park space was opening up and that there were going to be these hillsides, wouldn't it be fun to have sledding? So who knows what's going to happen with climate change, but there may be some winter activation of that as well. So another thing too to think about is along with physical interaction, this type of treatment also becomes an interesting visual experience for all of the apartments that are around that corner. As the sun moves from east west, you start to have all of these shadow changes, which I witnessed at the Johnson Pit number 30 is a really interesting dynamic that changes throughout the day. So next slide. Oh, sorry, I have it right here. I can just, no, you do it. So I know I shared this last time, but for the new commissioners, part of my community engagement work I created a 2-scale model where the base plan we CNC'd and then had that equivalent 50,000 cubic yards with kinetic soil that people could shape to start to inform the way we could shape that earth with little miniature Z-scale, miniature model railroad humans to help for understanding what that scale was. And just to share anecdotally, add to Erin's point about the design team process of this, in doing one community session that was co-led with a local artist, Abraham Awalan, and he brought together his Ethiopian and Eritrean community. And so we were playing with this model and talking with folks about where they would want public art placed. And someone was saying how they really want a public artwork that can serve as sort of a centerpiece for family photos, for wedding photos, and for graduation photos to kind of become a landmark experience. So that automatically starts to inform the direction, for example, for public art calls. But then, of course, the conversation continues, and they talk about, we also want to have, Erin was mentioning, family gatherings, and we want to have a place to have parties, because as you know, this neighborhood is predominantly renters. And so this park is really going to become people's backyards. And so trying to build out opportunities for that. And so this gentleman was saying, well, I was asking him, where would you like that place? And he was saying, somewhere close where we're hauling all of our stuff. We don't have to go all the way to the top of the reservoir, which is where we had initially proposed putting some type of a picnic structure. So that's just an example of how having the opportunity to be involved in the designs team goes beyond just assigning where percent for art stuff goes and helps inform the general programming of where activity is occurring on the site. So it's been great to be able to be involved in the design charrette process. And then one last thing just to mention is in doing also, along with kind of design process stuff with people and doing in-person surveys with folks to inform thematics for when we are drafting the calls for the percent for art. The two primary things that people want the commissioned art to do is to bring more community activity and engagement, as well to celebrate the diversity of the neighborhood. So those two things are really going to be informing the crafting of the various calls that we're in the process of thinking about right now as the final plan emerges for the park. So I will pass it back to Erin.
Thanks. So one of the other comments was lighting and security, questions, concerns about what that will be like and where we're headed as a team. And so one of the things we were able to do, we met on site with SPU security staff who will be actively in charge of monitoring this from their perspective, but also the Seattle Police Department and their representatives. And it was really valuable just to walk the site, get a sense of like what concerns they have or what kind of they have to deal with currently, but also share with them our concepts and ask them, okay, if this was built, what other thing, how could we improve upon this design? What other concerns you have? And so it's an ongoing conversation, and we had that with the public as well about safety, what makes them feel safe. And generally, the response was pretty consistent. If there's people, I feel safe. If it's active, I feel safe. There was discussions and questions about lighting. And the Seattle Police Department supported that idea. And working with Seattle Parks, it's an idea that we're going to continue to track and kind of better understand. Lighting can be counterintuitive if we just blast it all with light. So we want to be very selective and think through thoughtfully where lighting would be most valuable, so we're not creating dark spots unintentionally and not adding a lot of glare to neighbors. And so that's just going to be something that will continue to evolve with the parks design. But it's something that we recognize that could have a benefit here for this project. And I'll pass it off to Leo.
We're going to round the final corner here with the structural considerations, which really boiled down to an interest from a couple of the commissioners to see the potential for solar photovoltaic or PV panels on the top of this reservoir. So following the comments that we did receive from the schematic design presentation, SPU authorized a feasibility study, and this work was completed during January with the design consultant team, and we also had support from a regional PV system supplier and installer. So the findings from those memos, SPU leadership did approve the use of the top of the reservoir for solar panel installation, with the understanding that we needed to integrate that in with what might be SPU's facility concerns as well as what might be operational needs. And so just to let you know what some of those are, there will be a camera installation at the center of the reservoir. And so the security group asked for unfettered access to all of the hatches. So there's 4 large hatches and basically centered in each quadrant of the reservoir roof. And then in from there, there are 4 vents that are needed for basically for control of the water in the reservoir. So what ends up is approximately 20% of coverage of the roof that we're able to provide for the installation of the panels, which actually worked out ideally for what the PV panel installers proposed for placement of the panels. What we would be proposing is to secure it to the roof with a ballast system here. You see its framework that then supported by precast concrete blocks. This is favored by our structural engineer as well, so we don't have to be drilling in attachments to the roof. And then perhaps if in the future, filling in all those holes if we need to do rearrangements and things like that. So we are looking to orient them at a 5 to 10 degree angle to the south and west, which is great because that avoids glare to the apartments to the east side of the project. Additionally, these panels now come with standard anti-glare coatings, so that will take care of that for us as well. So how does the system work? Basically, there are 2 different sizes or opportunities that Seattle City Light provides. With the footprint that we have, we're developing approximately 100 kilowatt hours from the system. What this does is it generates enough power to offset approximately 80% of the site's future power use. What they do is they install a replacement bidirectional service meter. And so it's not for instantaneous use at the site. What it does is we feed power back into the grid, and then SPU is taking power from the grid. And so every month there's a credit that's provided to SPU for it. And so it's a nice fortunate thing for SPU too. It's about a 15 to 20 year break-even point for the installation of this. And the panels themselves have about a 30-year lifetime right now. What we are proposing to do is to include this as a separate contract after the construction of the reservoir, just because technology changes so fast. And then what we will be doing with the final design for the reservoir project, though, is installing all of the conduit, making the place for the new service meter, getting everything prepped. So we just need to run the wires, if you will, up to the solar panel installation on the roof.
So that concludes our presentation today. So thank you for the design commission. Everyone else here, if you have any questions, we're here to answer them.
Thank you.
Yep.
Kevin, just checking quickly, we have 3 people attending online. They may all be associated with the project. So if you are attending online and you want to make up to 2 minutes of public comment, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll keep an eye out through where we're going to transition right now to commissioner question. But if you do have a question, raise your hand and we'll be sure to call back to you before the end of questions. So, having rambled on with that, Kevin, how do you want to start us off?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think what we'll do, so we have one presentation. Thank you very much. We have 2 separate actions. So I think what we'll do is we'll do 1 round of questions by commissioners, which can be about the reservoir and or the park. So anything having to do with the presentation we just saw. So we'll do that, and then we'll go around twice, and we'll do the reservoir action first, because that's kind of in final design, and then we'll do the parks action. So we have 3 rounds. We have a little round an hour, so just keep that in mind, everybody. And so with that, unless there are public comments, we'll just go ahead and start with commission questions. And Molly, we don't want to forget about you out there in remote land. So we'll start with Molly, and then we'll go to Phoebe and come around this way. So Molly, you want to start with questions?
Great, thank you. I just had a couple of quick questions. So the first one, I know that we had discussed this prior. Is there a view from south of the reservoir toward downtown Seattle based on the current elevation of the path that wraps to the south of the reservoir?
No. We looked at that both visiting the site because we can get pretty high up, as well as our model. Google Earth, kind of forces it or simulates it and makes Mount Rainier look perfect, of course, too. But because of trees and the topography, you can't really see downtown.
Okay, great.
I'll add to that, that when we went to the current top of the elevation of the reservoir, the kind of the most visual interest of the viewpoint was actually the really established coniferous trees that surround the kind of northwest side of the park. And so what will be the sort of visual interest up there will be that feeling of being kind of surrounded by greenery on that side, as compared to on the south end, you don't actually get a lot of that kind of excitement of a reveal of a Space Needle or something like that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. One other quick question. So on that western edge, where I know the food forest is now in that area once you get to the northern portion of that western edge, and I know that that western edge is held by the fence to the single family residential, and you mentioned the buffer zone. Were there any concerns as you looked at that area about kind of safety and the descending grade down into that fence area?
Yeah, it's something that we're going to be continue to work on and refining the design. Some aspects of it is stormwater SPU, as well as in the future parks. Because of the low point along that edge, it actually serves a pretty good spot for kind of a stormwater swale along that kind of fence line almost. And it's kind of shown in the graphic here as a black sort of dash line. And then we'll have trees, but of course the underlying sort of vegetation will need to be kept lower so that, it can be seen kind of underneath and kept open as much as possible. So.
Great. Thank you so much. That's it for me, Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Molly. Phoebe?
Great, thank you. Thank you all for really the in-depth presentation. It's fun to see. So I just numbered my questions here, so I'll try to get through them. The first one is kind of an easy one about the plaza and play area. Are they both appear to be completely new, is that correct?
Yes.
And so then my follow-up question to that is, did you explore, you've moved the play area a bit, but it's more or less in kind of the, same location, and the plaza is the same location. Mm-hmm. Did the team explore moving those areas? Like perhaps, expanding along that corner or thinking about Linden? I'm just curious, were there other sites considered?
We did hear from the community that there was this idea of parents specifically being able to watch kids at the playground, but maybe also be working in the pea patch or also being in the plaza and having them, maybe they do kind of shift around, but there's a visual and a physical connection between the three of those. And so wanting to keep the existing pea patch where it was and knowing we wouldn't be able to shift the play area too far away from the existing kind of lended itself to kind of having that sort of active space all along that northern edge. I also say that stormwater treatment will be a challenge for this project because we have to keep everything on site. And we have a number of existing swales and ponds, and some of the swales have overgrown vegetation, so we have to find room to fit those in the lower spots as well. And that's kind of shown in the preferred concept as well. So we didn't really look at locating larger plazas or playgrounds dramatically further than where they're at now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So actually that was a good segue to what my kind of getting at is, so the stormwater areas that you're showing that may be existing that you're expanding upon is right by the 9 in that corner in the north. Okay. And then also along Linden then, so it's kind of separating right of way, then it goes stormwater, and then it goes to park. Okay. I think what I am curious about, and I can kind of comment on that later, but you made I think an interesting point about talking about street edge activations and like food trucks and how you kind of are, you know, treating the edges. And then you've also talked about the mid-block crossing at Linden. And what, you know, I guess I'll kind of still frame it as a question is how are those edges actually being eroded? Because I do see these kind of barriers with the stormwater. And so we can talk about it later again, but just I think the question is like, how would you describe kind of those edge treatments and really kind of celebrating that mid-block crossing or utilizing that to advantage of the park?
Yeah, it's a challenge, I'll admit, because when Consour's really helped us, basically there's existing stormwater on site, and if we touch it, we have to account for that volume somewhere else. But then we're also adding a lot of hard surface and soft surface that we have to treat. And all of these stormwater areas naturally want to be at their lowest spots to have kind of make the most use of them, which ends up being kind of along the street edges. So I acknowledge, like, how do we balance needing to account for that, but making sure they're not barriers? So we'd welcome feedback on that.
That's helpful to hear. Yeah, and it gives me a lot more answered a lot of those questions about those edges. Okay, then I think the third was just about stormwater story. You talked about that in the beginning. You have an interesting graphic about, you know, recharge and the Tolts. Sorry, I just came up. You're sitting next to me. I just and so how is that stormwater story transpiring throughout the site? Like to, you know, and that might just, the answer could just be that that's continuing to proliferate later on in the design, but just curious about that a little bit more.
Yeah, we have, it is getting to more of a refined detail, whether it's for SPU or parks, and we have some ideas on maybe how to approach that for both of them. But it's something we're still exploring.
Okay, then the last question is more about timeline. So this is the preferred concept that you're working on now based on community feedback. And then this will go to ProView. And then as a preferred schematic design, and then the projects it will be on hold in effect for 4 years, or
I wouldn't say hold for 4 years. Kevin could probably speak to maybe what the timing is on picking up the design towards final design, like how quickly that would occur. But I don't know if you have a specific timeline on that, but we do have time because of how long SPU will need to take to finish their design and construction, but we don't want to wait till the end.
Well, yeah, it's a little bit of an exaggeration.
Right, as Aaron mentioned, it's a little bit of figuring out when park district funds will be allocated, and then that's when we can take up the next phase to actually complete schematic and plans. So the anticipated part is a little bit backing it up from when we get on when construction can happen on the site, thinking about permitting. So it's 6 somewhere there.
Yeah. And is there any plans for activation or kind of community coherence, you know, especially like there is you know, it's a renter's community, you know, people are going to be kind of moving in and out potentially. You know, some ways of kind of keeping the dream alive, so to speak, on the park property. Is there any kind of conversation about that or parks activation?
Not at this location. It's, you know, most of park activation is focused on downtown parks.
Mm-hmm.
There is a Seattle Parks Special Events Unit. They do some activation at smaller parks throughout the city, but nothing is discussed for this. Most of the effort for programming is really focused at the community centers.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't have any questions, Brian. Well, I had the benefit. I had the benefit of treatment.
Oh.
So I don't think I should take it.
She's that good. She's that good. That's amazing. Maybe excellent questions. Maybe I can continue with the schedule question. This park seems to be an amazing amenity for the community. Is there any way to perhaps phase the construction such that you keep half of the park open during those years of construction? Because I think if we are going to close this whole block, you lose access to the amenity of the neighborhood for the duration, the entire duration. So is there a north half construction, south half construction happens one year and then the next year or any of that? I think just cutting off the amenity from the community for a whole duration is gonna be a blow to a lot of those renters who use it as their backyards.
There hasn't been any discussion about phasing.
Yeah.
I mean, that'll have to come after, towards the end of the reservoir construction and as we pick it up.
Sure, but that might play into the idea of keeping the existing playground, building a new one over here, not in the same place, because if you do build it in the same place, that means that it doesn't exist for a certain amount of time. It might help you locate things that you build a new one and then you open it and then you close the old one. And then the kids don't have a summer without playing.
I mean, there's a few parts of that.
I know.
And that, as Aaron mentioned, the existing play area, Seattle Parks has an asset management plan that every 21 years, part of equipment is replaced. And this part equipment is not old enough yet. And so there isn't any money for that. It's a little bit of passed on to the parks leadership that the current amount of funding, when we look at the actual construction budget, it's going to be somewhere less than $1 million. And I throw that out there in that, yes, this was a large park, and so I'm hoping there'll be some advocacy for increasing that budget. When you ask about our play area, currently play areas are about 800,000 or more. So it's more than, it's as much as the budget for just renovating the park. So.
Yeah, and I don't know if I've worked on a park project that hasn't been phased to some extent.
Understood, but
So-
it might help your design thinking. Right?
Totally.
Don't re-landscape and then put it in the same spot, but 5 feet elevated or something. The money question comes up as well. Your 3 design alternates also have different levels of complexity. I'm wondering what the benefits and the side effects of choosing a more elaborate thing is, what things are suffering or what things are not being funded. With a more complex layout, more paths, more everything, is there less money for art? Is there less money for playgrounds? I didn't hear any of the push-pull on the deciding. It's just the public said, oh, we love more, right? They're not judging on your budget. How did budget play into your design selections?
So the budget's completely separate for art. So
Yeah.
that's one thing. So
Not
that's reserved.
Good.
You know, I think we will do a cost estimate for 30%. And that will give us a good picture of what this total amount will be, which could also inform phasing for the reasons you mentioned as well. For the public and talking with them, we wanted them to have a vision of what was possible, knowing that we had a lot of time to potentially look for more funding, and not have budget be this like hard and fast, like we cannot do X, Y, and Z because we don't have the money now, because we have the time for us. And generally speaking, you know, we're not proposing anything that's like, you know, really outside of the scope of what has been developed in other parks in terms of typical costs and investment. So we didn't want that to be, just at least at this time, to be a limiting factor. But further on, in terms of cost development, community engagement, refinement of the plan, that will certainly need to come into consideration and adjustment.
Thank you. Another practicality question. I very much understand the fence around the existing reservoir. It keeps people away from the floating tarp, right? What does an 8-foot fence in this setting do that a 20-foot tall concrete wall is not going to do? Like, why do we need an 8-foot fence and then a tall concrete structure?
Right, it's one of the measures, like in talking to our security folks, with Homeland Security, there's certain measures that they give you. And with having the fence there, it basically pulls people away from it. So if you have someone right next to the reservoir, you don't know if they're just someone there having a good time or if it's someone that might maliciously try to do something. So when you have the fence there, if you see someone trying to breach that fence or trying to get to the reservoir, you know that someone is trying to get in there, right, to potentially do harm to get to the water. And so that's one of the aspects for the fence. And also if people are able to get to the reservoir, able to get on top, to get into the reservoir, then there's this concern of, you know, even if they don't even do anything to the water, there's this public perception, you know, something might have happened to our water, right? So then we have to drain the tank and then, you know, fill it back up, and there come a lot of issues with that. And they also have issues at other locations, like where they don't have fences. Like an example that they gave me is that, I think it was at like Volunteer Park, they have this pump station, and they have a vault there, and people keep breaking into this vault because they want to know what's in there, they want to do something. So they went out there and they put Jersey barriers, these big concrete blocks on top of them. And actually, people have moved those off, broken in. So now what they've had to do is they basically had to weld like pieces of steel on top of these vaults. So if they need to get in there, they have to go unweld those and move those. So it's like security is a big issue for our security department. So it's been something that was needed to protect the water.
And Lael, do you want to, I guess, just recognize new commissioner about the concrete aspect in terms of its sensitivity to the structure?
Yeah, I would also
might help.
Yeah, I'd also add that the EPA does recommend that you have a fence around any water storage structure. The nature of the construction, we don't have those pictures in this slide, we may have them later, but you do a reinforced concrete wall, and then you're pre-stressing this, and then you're shotcreting and pre-stressing. We have, over the years, seen people go with hammers and picks and crash against that shotcrete and expose those galvanized strands. And those galvanized strands are, I think it's 50,000 PSI. So there is concern, those pop, they start whipping around, and they will go for hundreds and hundreds of feet before they stop. You know, they need to get to the next support where you tied off that strand. So there is concern about should those be compromised, the damage that they would do.
Sure. My view on that is if somebody is that intent on doing damage to something, a fence is not going to get in their way, right? Like that's, but understood. On the ballasting system, I understand we don't want to physically attach to the tank.
Mm-hmm.
It does add significant amount of weight to that, and it will impart design impacts. I'm wondering if you are helping them understand what 20% you are intending to put the panels on. Part of my question on that is there's obviously structurally better places to put that rather than in the middle, in the long span, you know, at the perimeter. But I also love it when the city shows that they believe in sustainability and PVs, and those PVs are visible to the community, right? So I'm less of a reflection and glare concerned person, and more of the community should know that we are putting them up there. So I'd like to understand, you know, the 20% that you're.
Yeah, so
quoting.
right now the conceptual layout, again, this is not even the 5% level, if you will, is along the northern and then the eastern portion of the roof outside of the security, the equipment access hatches and the vents. The reservoir roof has been designed, so it's a column supported roof, so there's a column pretty much every 6 feet on center. So we're not concerned about some spots having less support than others.
Right.
These tanks are designed with a minimum 10 pounds per square foot, like live load consideration. The ballast system is 4 to 5 feet PSF, so there's no concern from our structural engineer about adding these. There's more concern about drilling hundreds and hundreds of holes to secure these rather than have the ballast system. So, you know, that is something we did vet with not only electrical but also our structural. So
I would check that number because that doesn't stop them from flying away.
the 5 PSF, send them out.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Ben, questions?
Did you say how much power the 20% solar was going to generate?
Yeah, it's approximately 100 kilowatt hour.
I thought so, yeah. And what does that convert into? Like, what, like, I don't understand electricity super well, so
Yeah.
Is that like 10 houses or?
It's, the way we looked at it was how much of the SPU properties power use will it offset? And so it offsets 80%. And that includes pump station operations.
Okay.
Again, it's like it's an averaging over time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. That was my only question. Sorry, I missed it.
No.
Zubin, go ahead.
Yeah, my only question was kind of about just the grading concept. So in that section that you had on page 15, you kind of showed, you know, maintaining the overall grade of kind of the existing reservoir profile, and I think that's the end of the SPU project. Is that right? Or are you going to be is that mostly going to be the profile for the landscape work as well? Or
These sections are a diagram of basically if SPU and Parks did nothing, more or less, what the grades would be, just installing the reservoir. But there's more minute detail in terms of getting the viewpoint path in and then the park elements as well as the land art.
Right.
So
okay. Yeah, and just I guess, you know, I know we're still really early, but I guess, you know, next time when we come in to talk about landscape stuff, it would be great to see the elevations on the landscape design and, you know, and have the landscape section just so we can kind of understand what's going on there. Because the thing I was kind of interested in was, you know, there's this once in a lifetime opportunity to change the grading of this site, right? And it's such a huge, massive presence in the neighborhood, and it's going to continue to be a huge, massive presence, but the footprint of the new facility is so much smaller that I just kind of wonder what the possibilities are for that whole north half of the site, right? Like, are we going to keep the usable parts kind of up high? Are we going to split the difference? Are we going to keep the most usable parts low? So I think kind of a study, and I'm sure you're obviously thinking about all this stuff already, but just kind of in really big terms, like where's the flat spot going to be? Where the slope's going to, you know, it's going to be slope, flat, slope. Is it going to be, you know, flat by the street and then a steeper slope, which seems to be the idea behind the viewpoint. So just kind of understanding what that looks like, I think would be really helpful for next time.
Do you have the contours in my head?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's slide with some contours that might be helpful. They're not elevations, but it might be a better idea.
Well, and so I was, so is that's kind of,
that's kind of the rough grade probably at this point, just to get the viewpoint path in. generally speaking, we don't have a lot of flexibility to alter the grades on the east side because we're kind of sandwiched between the access path and SPU's facilities in Linden. We just run out of space. Similar to the west side, we're trying to kind of push that grade towards the single family housing a little bit just to get the path accessible and there. But we don't want to create hiding spots down there either. The south and the north side have the more flexibility. South side kind of does a bit of this plateau element. The nice thing about the off-leash area is that that doesn't have to be completely flat. So that gives us some flexibility to have that slope a little bit. Also, it's helpful for drainage to slope that for treating that area. The northern half, you kind of basically have it right where we have the pea patch that's terraced already, and then we kind of continue to terrace it a little bit, and then it flattens out where we have the lawn area and picnic area, and then it starts to climb again. And that's where the land art will start to really come into play. But we have a full 3D model, and we could definitely give you snapshots and sections next time.
Okay. Yeah, no, that'd be great to see.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll just wrap up with a couple of pretty, hopefully quick questions. One, if you could go to the preferred concept, the accessible pathway graphic. Yep. Great. Also sort of a question about timeline. So with the SPU project, you've talked about how the pathway for your project has evolved. And then this is obviously much broader circulation system. So how would this all be constructed or phased together ultimately? How do you see that all happening? Because it's an impressive system overall, but how would you see it being implemented over all at the same time? Or
so ideally, what would happen is with construction, our contractor would go out there, build the reservoir, and then we'll be doing kind of our final gradient towards the end. So we'd have that, that viewpoint path coming up, right? And then we kind of indent that. And ideally, then once we're done, then the parks contractor would come in, right after that, and then they would start developing the park.
Okay. So you would see that one path being done.
Yeah, first. Okay. And then for some reason, there's time between that, they can start already.
Okay.
Right, we'd have to probably do some seeding or some temporary erosion control, and then we'd have the path, or if we opened up the site, that people could use that path until it would come back down. But ideally, they'd be back to that.
Okay, and then the only other question I have right now, so on the Parks project, and I know it's early, but I think we mentioned this back in November. I mean, Linden is part of the interurban trail. It's a really important kind of regional facility. Mm-hmm. So will there be bike parking along Linden or as part of the program?
Yeah, that certainly has been on our mind, knowing that this will be a stopping point along that trail. And that could be is something that, in addition to just racks, there could be other amenities that are helpful for bicyclists.
Great, because I think you're spot on. I mean, there's not a lot of places. I've ridden interurban many times, and this will be a really great stopping point. So I think building on that will be. I guess that's a comment, not a question. But building on that will be really important.
But that's a good way to.
It's a good segue to the comment. So commission members, we're now in comments with really the intent of formulating our final recommendation. I think this is our last bite at the apple on the reservoir. So let's do that first, and then we'll kind of get to the park. So I think some categories around which we might want to focus our deliberation. One is resolution of previous commission input, which you arrayed your presentation around that. So that was very helpful. Thank you. Any comments, recommendations on final project details, including the above ground portion of the reservoir, the path system, the solar panels, which Brian asked about, et cetera. Any comments on that? The relationship to the parks project, that's probably something that will come up in comments on both. And then overall vision to kind of integrate the facility and respond to neighborhood concerns, also something that we'll maybe come up with during the park project. And then anything else anybody wants to mention. But again, we're really trying to formulate our final recommendation here. So we'll start for comments. Why don't we switch it around, and we'll start with Zubin.
I don't have any comments on the SPU.
Okay.
SPU project.
Ben?
I support Brian's comment of, I would put the solar panels in a visible spot just to support that story. I think that's a nice story to tell. So, but otherwise, I don't have any further comments. I will just say a really nice presentation, by the way. I guess that earlier. Nice to learn.
Right?
I'm a huge fan of consolidating the reservoir and giving land and space back to the community. I think that is going to be the hallmark of this project. It's going to be really great for the community. I have a question about moving this much earth and trying to phase a project. I think that's going to be very complex. But I'm sure that's something that we can tackle. So I appreciate it.
Jill?
Not meaning to gum up your works at all, but I just want to remind our commissioners, or the new ones know, that we wrote a letter last summer, and I want to read a little bit of it, where we asked Andrew, you and Kevin and your departments to align this design work just for this reason. We should hope the city can allocate sufficient funding to enable the parks to complete a robust and inclusive visioning process for the future of the space, following the initial design of the park and open space, so that the needs of can be part of the reservoir replacement analysis. Ensuring the public has an opportunity to express their values and goals for a new public open space, and aligning the design processes will provide efficiencies and return the best possible outcomes for an important and underserved community. We know that a planning artist has been selected, and that this, meaning the last 6 months, is the perfect time for SPU Parks and the Office of Arts and Culture to approach this site in a comprehensive manner. Moving the reservoir replacement forward without initial parks and open space design would foreclose creative options for placemaking, integrated artwork, and public access. The opportunity to collaborate closely with the Bitterlake community to create a vibrant, accessible, and meaningful neighborhood asset is now. We have seen SPU utility infrastructure replacement projects elevated into genuine and valued community-centered spaces. We'd like to help champion and elevate this project to a similar level of excellence and community benefit. And I touch back on this because I just really want to thank you for doing that. You know, you write letters like this, and Kevin, you too. Staff can either get pissed off or they can genuinely take it that we're trying to help. And I think what we're seeing here is a really, even beyond earnest and sincere effort at that. I think that you've really done some great work. And I personally have no problem at all moving the reservoir piece forward. And Becky, you too, arts and jumped in, it helped quite a bit as well.
Do you mind if I take something on there?
No.
You opened the door. That was a
Kevin.
that was a hard letter to write. We spent a lot of time, and it was a hard letter in some way to deliver because we wanted to be very clear that any concern that was being raised by the commission was not a reflection of the skill and ability of the design team, rather an opportunity for SPU management and budgeting to think about this in a different way, and had a hard conversation, frankly, with the bidder management about it. Jill said everything that I would want to say about thanking you as well. That was a hard process at point, but you did more. And so that's the only thing I wanted to tack on, so thank you. Thank you.
Tough act to follow.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that was good. I actually was on pins and needles, like, what's Jill going to say now?
Share prerogative.
Yeah, I don't have much more comment. I think the only, one of the things, I think I mentioned this in the subcommittee meeting, definitely appreciate moving the circulation and the viewpoint away from the reservoir. I think that's going to be successful. And so, you know, I think you've already hit on this. The only thing is just to, as you're nailing down the commitment for the viewpoint and the grading, it's obviously an understanding that that grading is going to be manipulated later at that base. But also, I think something came up that hasn't been mentioned yet, actually before you guys were in the room, is just thinking about how that path can also, is it at the right elevation now? So actually this is, you know, does there want to be pauses along the way? It's kind of this, it's just, you know, assessing the experience along the whole route, and it is at a comfortable grade, but, you know, are there any pullouts? Does that affect, you know, does the viewpoint go down a foot or something, right? And so that would be just one kind of final exploration of kind of understanding the tone of that path as it reaches up to the viewpoint. But otherwise, I think good to go, and thank you.
Molly?
Great, thank you. And Jill, thank you. I think you got to so many of my points by reading that letter. So similarly, I just want to express appreciation for the integrated process between SPU and parks. It's been really clear what some of the wins are associated with that. I also just appreciate the inclusion of PV on the roof. I know that that was something that Matt brought forward, and your continued study of that is greatly appreciated. I also agree with the idea of looking for opportunities for visibility for that PV panel, for the PV panels, that 20%. I also really appreciate the responsiveness to pulling the path away from the fence, and agree with continued study of clarification of that grading height. I also appreciate seeing the continued development of that ADA access. And another piece that I appreciated hearing that Kate spoke to briefly was the continued potential to impact the appearance of that fence throughout the parks process. So just encouragement to continue to look at what that looks like, and what the materiality of that fence is able to be. I also appreciated hearing that there's continued consideration about the lighting throughout the process. I know that originally the lighting around the reservoir itself was pretty set in stone early, and so the continued thinking about what safety regarding lighting as well as experiential lighting looks like throughout the parks process, I greatly appreciate. I would ask that SPU continues in conversations with parks as parks clarifies the phasing for the overarching area, and we'll talk more in that comments section about phasing associated with the parks. And then I would also just encourage, if because this does impact the SPU component, just if there are any thoughts that arise for parks as you approach what the views are into the site near the existing pump station, near existing portions that are within SPU purview, that you all continue to have conversations collaboratively about those areas as they do form gateways into the park itself and into some of those major programmatic spaces. And that is it for me.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. I'm going to try to pull this together. So first of all, we'd like to thank the project team for their presentation on design development for the reservoir portion of the site. We'll also be thanking the parks people in the next action, so don't feel left out. This will be the final time the commission looks at the reservoir portion of the project, unless any specific detail or issue needs any administrative review. I'm not anticipating that. And then we'll also look forward to further review of the park. So overall, I think the commission, first and foremost, really appreciates how SPU has responded to both our comments at the November meeting, and really appreciated you arraying your presentation on that, but also to Jill's point, our earlier comments from last summer. And I think we all wanted to see the integration of the SPU and parks and art components, and you really demonstrated that today. So thank you very much. So in terms of recommendations, the only thing I'm really hearing on the reservoir I'll just list a couple. One, continued coordination between SPU and parks and arts on the further development, the implementation around grading, the pedestrian facilities, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, obviously that's going to be critical to the overall success of this. Looking at the location of solar panels, I think that's something that's come up a little bit. So that's maybe part of the final refinement. As you develop as SPU develops your pedestrian system, just looking at potential pullout areas, view corridors, et cetera, has come up in a couple comments. And then I think in terms of other final recommendations on the reservoir, I'm not hearing anything else. So I would put forward a motion that Seattle Design Commission approves design development for the reservoir portion of the Bitterlake project with those recommendations, and ask for this go around. And I'll start with Zubin again.
Yeah, vote to approve.
Vote to approve.
Aye. Yes.
Yes, approve.
Molly?
Approved.
Okay, vote to approve. So you have unanimous approval on the reservoir. So now we'll shift quickly to the park. And we might have a little bit more of a discussion on this because it's early. So if we can go a little beyond 12, hopefully that's okay with everybody. So thank you for the presentation on the parks. And I think I could see a number of categories around which we might want to comment. One, just the preferred concept vis-a-vis the alternatives that we heard, the variety of program elements, integration with the nearby neighborhood, and particularly maybe some of the edges, as Phoebe was talking about. I think this might be where we might ask questions about the art program. Response to site grading concerns and constraints. I think that's something that's already come up. Relationship to the reservoir program. Any goals, any broader goals for sustainability, architecture, et cetera. And then finally, the public engagement strategy. And I think really appreciate, I want to say more about that later, but really appreciate some of the work that's been done there. But those are all things that I think we could comment about in addition to anything else. So Molly, why don't we reverse things, and we'll start with you for comments on the parks project.
Okay, great. So as we looked at the alternatives that you all shared, I really appreciate that the preferred concept does include a loop trail opportunity. So thank you for sharing the development toward that. I also wanted to note, I mentioned this one briefly in the last comments, but on that eastern edge as it approaches the community and where the mid-block crossing is recommended, I would ask that there's a kind of deep focus on what the gateway experience is in that area, and how it provides welcoming views and access, and what the kind of encouragement towards some of the trail system at that crossing provides, and how that is done, and to do so if needed in collaboration with SPU if that does have relationship with their pathways up to the reservoir, or with any of the existing buildings on site. I would also recommend considering how phasing confirms or changes the current programming locations. I know that one was brought up earlier by other commissioners. And then in the landscape process, I would just ask that we assure visibility along that western edge near the fence. You all spoke to that, and the way that that's already a consideration in those stormwater areas on the western edge, and near the food forest. So just continuing to think about what visibility looks like in that area. And then also just considering what is the best experiential height for that grading as it wraps around the reservoir, for visibility for safety purposes, for visibility for accessibility purposes, not visibility, and just to gut check the grading and its relationship to the phasing on site. And that is it for me. I'll pass it along to the room.
Thanks, Molly. Why don't we go to PP next?
Great. I'm going to just quickly piggyback on Molly. Yes, the loop is great. Keep on going with loops. That's one comment. Second, okay, so talking about the edges, which I brought up before, and that also relates to, so it's a mid-block crossing and it's the 2 street frontages, and it also is what Molly was talking about too with the existing structures on site. And so I really encourage the team to think about how those edges can be opened up. I think if you do the squint view and you kind of look at how you're going to access the site from those edges, it really has this interior focus and it doesn't have this kind of welcomingness that I think we would want to see in kind of some places where it can be closed and some places where it can be open. So I feel a little concerned about just like the insularity of some of those spaces, especially along Linden, and that's not really speaking to the mid-block crossing. So to that end, is there a potential to amass the stormwater a little bit more strongly? I understand that they're existing, but they could be expanded or kind of put to that, the larger, I know the very southeast corner is the lowest point. It's already an existing facility. Can that be expanded? It may already be, I think. But anyway, considering those opportunities to think about how you can have different relationships with the street, I think is very important. And especially you have the housing, a strong element across the street there at Linden. Let's see. One of the things that resonated, I think Kate mentioned it, is that the community talked about this, or you're acknowledging it's a backyard, and this really has potential to be a great gathering space. And so again, that goes with the edges and just like how you're treating those kind of entrees and those relationships with the community. And so I do have a little concern when I look at the plan, any of them, it's a little bit segmented. And I'm a little concerned just about the scale of spaces and where those places are that can really invite community and kind of have those flexible open spaces that they may desire or kind of use. I think that is really a reality. People could use this for birthday parties and picnics and grilling, and right, you don't have any other exterior space in your living environment. So, kind of being able to pull that in, and I think that goes back to the grading as well of where are the flat spaces, where are those kind of those bigger spaces amassed, because it is a little bifurcated right now. There are a lot of smaller entities. And then let's see. 2 more. Continuity spaces. I love the land art. I do think that has the real potential to also be the unifying factor of the site. So just continuing to explore that. I think especially you do have some kind of hidey holes on the south end. I think the dog area makes sense over there in a way, right? To activate that edge and also not be in the social space. So I think programmatically there's a lot of sense to that. But how is that gradient across that transition across the site tied together? So I think there is a great potential with the land art, and then using that land art to help, which you are already talking about. So just excited to hear that expand for how that also helps inform public open space and the amphitheater and play, and use that, maybe that becomes a stronger unifying element, and potentially can simplify that bifurcation of spaces. And then last, for the play area, understanding your budget, I think that's really good for the commissioners to hear. Play areas are easy, $800,000, right? Just with the circulation and everything that's involved. So your budget is $1 million right now. Excited that there is the pause for more fundraising, because I'm sure the project will get it. But then, if the play area can then just kind of be cited and put on pause, and then also see what's happening and coordinate with Bitterlake Community Center, so that there is not duplication, but more of a collaboration and a complementary situation between the two, which I think is already very well founded with the land art, but that can continue to expand in the future or develop in relationship. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think most of my comments are on edges as well. I think right now, as you circle the 2 accessible sides of the park, the things that are there are like bites out of it, and you get to heal all that. But you have to live with some of these existing back of house spaces that are plopped right where you want to welcome people. Just this tension. I think scale does have a lot to do with that. I think the corner, I think the ability to open up that corner of Linden and 143rd, keep looking at that. And maybe the basketball court's right, and maybe it's not, and maybe trees to chop it up and right, or maybe it's more open. Right, maybe it opens right up to that, the play area, you know? And maybe there's a big pole there that you don't need to make little things into. So I think that's something to really look at as you develop it. Then I just continually get struck by not just the south edge, but the fact that between 130th and 143rd, there's no damn way to get from east to west. And some of that's Bitterlake, and you know, we have this really suburban Bitterlake, Haller Lake, private, weird enclave things. But you're in it too. And so I just think, and I promise not to write a letter about it unless you want us to. I think it's time to get with SDOT and just really drill down on 138. I think the dog park's the right impulse for how it feels there now. But I think that there's all the stuff that needs to happen to 138th to make that even make that successful. And to make your entry there. So that I love that the entry at the south made it into the preferred alternative. I understand that there's a maintenance piece to that, but I just think bodies and activity there. I mean, 138th right now feels like the longest alley or private driveway in the city. And, you know, I understand that it can't be connected to the other side of 138th, but it can have connectivity to the other side of 138th. It could have sidewalks. It could have a bike path. It could have all kinds of neighborhood amenities, because you want to pull those people from Greenwood here too, you know, which is where that street last has an intersection. So I would really encourage you to double down, triple down on the growth potential at that corner, because it's hidden right now. And I think you've done great with the growth potential on your other two public sides, but I'd love to see you do more with that side. And then I factor into that Kevin's comments about the bike lane and Linden as well. So I think there's a huge SDOT piece to be picked up soon. And let us know if you want any. Thank you.
I love that comment. Because I think we're transforming a park that is at 143rd right now. It's a little sliver of a park to a big park that's going to be used. I love that it's connected on all four corners. But it does seem amenity heavy to 143rd, not 138. I think you have a few opportunities and a few challenges, right? You're going to put a big pot of water right in the middle of your park. I think you should probably look a little bit at like a shading study or a sun exposure study. To me, as a gardener, the last place I want to plant is on a north-facing slope. And the number one thing is a south-facing slope. So I feel like 138 right now is sort of a wasteland of a hill. And every time I go past it, I was like, I wish I could put plants on it. I wish I could garden there, right? Because it's warm and sunny and beautiful all the time. So maybe that's a patch big garden opportunity, and it frees up something on the north side for some other amenity. There's always costs and benefits and pros and cons, right? Yeah, so I guess I would look at the park much bigger and say, where do things actually want to go? How do we activate to the south as much as to the north? I think I've already talked about phasing and keeping the park alive somehow for the people. Maybe you leave the sliver all the way to the north just active while you build 80% of the rest of the park, because that's kind of how it is now. and then you come back and you repair the last 20% in the last couple of months of the project, right? Like maybe that becomes the obvious phasing path, and then you keep an active park, and so I want it open now. I love this park. This looks great already. So how can we help? Is the question.
Thanks, Brian. Ben?
I had a question or maybe a comment or a request on the play area. I think there's some pretty progressive play equipment or I'm just gonna call it equipment, playground equipment. It isn't like the bright yellow, plastic, blue, red, a little bit more natural or just more interesting, I guess. It seems like it would fit within the theme of this park, which is really beautiful as well. So I would encourage that kind of thinking on the play area. And then I'm just trying, it looks like the basketball court is a half court basketball court, which could be, but full court's a little bit more fun. If you get a group of people, also provides a little bit more, you kind of have half the court can be playing. You have a couple of games. Anyway, I know the basketball courts in our neighborhoods are really used a lot, especially in the summer. So it's just a comment more than not even necessarily a request, but basketball courts are pretty nice amenities. They're really loud though too. So if it's close to, I don't know if there's houses. I don't know, like houses. What's that? Yeah, that's pretty loud. Anyway, it's a lovely park, and I appreciate the comment about the south-facing for gardening. I don't know if the dog park makes sense on the north side or not, but swap those. That's interesting. So anyway, it's really a lovely looking park, though. I'm excited for it.
Can I missed one of my, we are a reservoir. I think it would be fun to catch some of the water that you're putting into bioswales and give it to the gardeners. Like have a little mini reservoir for the gardeners or something, right? Like, it seems like we use a lot of city water sometimes, and to be able to have them in their own sustainable loop seems pretty interesting.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think just like I said before, I'm just really interested to kind of get in the weeds on what it feels like and, kind of what the landforms feels like. I wish I had been at that workshop where you're playing with the.
Still have it. We can do it.
Yeah. But I think, it's like right now, it's this super impenetrable barrier that takes up most of the block. The fence is way out, right? And we're totally transforming the whole thing, right? Like we're taking the fence away, we're making it more of it habitable. So I think just everything we can do to kind of make it feel like an opportunity rather than a barrier, I think is just by studying the views and so forth, as people have mentioned, I think is really important. And I think, this viewpoint, I'm still curious about, like, so we're berming up to create this viewpoint. We're using the excavation to do that, right? But we're still not seeing over the reservoir, I think, right? Or are we?
No,
we're not, right? Okay. So I guess I'm just a little curious, like that seems like kind of unfortunate. Like when I saw it in plan, I was like, oh, I really want to be able to see all the way around this thing. And I get, we're working with a certain amount of dirt and all that, but so we're creating this huge moment, but you still kind of can't see to the south. So I'm just curious about like kind of how all that works and if it's worth it and if it's shaped the right way and those kinds of questions. So I think just seeing the contours overlaid on the landscape plan and seeing the sections next time, I think would be super helpful to just really understand that experience. So.
Okay, so I'm going to sneak my comments into the summary. So again, we'd like to thank the project team for the presentation on initial concepts for the park portion of the project. I presume we'll see this again, Michael, at some point, 30% or whatever on the park side. So I think overall the commission appreciates for the parks portion, one, that there is a parks portion, and that parks is working with SPU and arts and really appreciate that. I want to say too that I'm folding this into our overall statement, but really appreciate the inclusive outreach. The fact that you translated materials, that you went to events, with the apartments close by. I mean, I used to work for the city and use those DON liaisons and translators, and it's a really powerful tool, and it's a great way to expand the scope of what you're hearing from the community. So thank you very much for that. I really want to note that. So I heard several recommendations, so I will try to summarize those, and we'll invite my colleagues to throw in anything I missed. But strong support for the loop trail concept and just the accessible pathways generally, and encourage that to keep moving forward. Really continue to focus on the edges and the gateways. I agree with Jill's comment of, I think there's good opportunities to kind of coordinate with SDOT as you look at streetscape improvements and maybe looking for ways. I mean, that the pathway on the south really is kind of the way you're opening up 138th right now, and just, continue to kind of develop, any opportunities to do that more. I heard some comments on the play area, just thinking about, how that might, develop over time. Heard comments and recommendations about just the overall slope and grading of the site, just making sure that things are in the right places as you continue to develop the grading plan and the art plan. I think there's a lot of really, just as an aside, I went to Peru in October, and a lot of the Inca ruins have that. I don't think they were thinking about land art when they built that, but
They were thinking of sun.
They were thinking about terracing and agriculture. And so when I saw those images, that's the first thing that kind of popped to mind. So it's just really intriguing to think about how that could play out over time. And then really thinking about the overall just view corridors, because of the grading and because of the size of the park and the number of ways people will access the park. I think it's going to make for really interesting views, I think, in different areas. And so I think just an analysis of that at the next steps, I think, would be really helpful for the public as well, to kind of understand what they're going to be seeing. And again, I'll just speak to that main gateway on Linden. That is where the apartments are. There's a lot of density, as you know, on that side of the street. And then I think this will be the premium stopping point on the Interurban Trail for many miles, actually, on both sides. So just kind of build that into the further refinements of design.
The only thing that I would add is try to get to Zubin's comment about, totally understand why it's the terminus of the path is where it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think it gets to Phoebe's comment, as you're on the south side of that, and when you're at 495, 496, if there is a pause to deal with just the reality of climbing that slope, is that the territorial view that you can work in if you're above tree line and development enough to give that one view that you're not able to get at the apex of that, but as a place where things are coming together. I'm going up that hill and I need to stop. I need to take a breath. Oh, there's downtown Seattle way over there. Wouldn't that be a nice thing to be able to do if grade, if development, if natural features allow that? And that might take.
And then I think the last thing I would add, just on the recommendation side, is just continuation with the outreach you're doing with the community, and still using those tools to try to reach as many people as possible. So great job so far. It'd be great to see that continue. Are there anything else that any other commissioners wanted to mention in terms of recommendations I may have forgotten?
Molly, did you?
The recommendation about clarifying when you next come to us how phasing confirms or changes
Yes, thank you.
programmatic locations would be great.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Molly. I even underlined the word phasing, and I forgot to mention it. So thank you for adding that. And I think that will be really important to understand at the next phase. So with that, I think we are ready to hopefully vote to approve the design concept for the park portion of the Bitterlake project with the recommendations that were mentioned. And Molly, will start the voting with you this time.
Approved with recommendations.
Phoebe?
Same, approved with recommendations.
Yes.
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 Vote to approve. Thank you very much for the presentation. Really appreciate it. I appreciate the work done so far.
Yeah. Thank you all for your comments.
One of the things I didn't say, and this is something that the commission tries to tackle in the policy that we have on equity and the design of public space and what we expect to see at the departmental level about how RSJI informs the work that you're doing. That kind of work is what we expect to see in all the things that we do. We don't always necessarily get to see that, but that threshold that you establish is notable.
Yeah.
In terms of going to where people are, doing that as opposed to making them come to you and doing it in a meaningful way. So that's the kind of thing we expect to see in projects, and you guys rose to that. And so thank you very much for doing that. So a nice threshold for SPU as well and other work. Thank you. Apparently this is my day for making it offhand. I didn't want that to go away because it really is important to the commission to see city departments rethinking what equity actually means in engagement. And that's the kind of thing that I think that we want to see, and hopefully it's institutionalized in other parts of SPU.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll actually be able to give a short presentation to the Parks Department of just and just all of their project managers to kind of give a picture of what this experience has been like and just things we've learned. So I hope to sprinkle those seeds of things we've learned. And
thank you. Why don't we take a bit of a break, and we can kind of reconvene in about 10 minutes, and we can have a business portion. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks very much. I feel like you were going to lean back and let your statement.
No. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm glad I did.
Really, yeah, like just to see the pilot on cruising. Yeah. Really? Yeah, it's just really. Oh, yeah. You're actually doing. And then.
Oh, better than I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can show you that as well. Yeah, there's some other.
Collection of wires, right?
It's for everything. I know. I don't even have to charge.
Slows. I was so excited when Europe made America
Yeah.
use one charger type.
Yeah.
Yes. But not. USB-C.
Yeah.
So they.
My,
They differently.
You might.
Yeah. Yeah. But I still have.
I have a lightning.
Yeah.
I have a USB-C. I have a. Yeah, I don't even know what they're called.
All my, yeah, my kids have one that's like flat on the bottom and then it's has.
Just to have
I travel with this one and it's got enough juice to actually charge your laptop. Almost works.
I have one that's also a battery. So it's the same maker, but it's the size of this.
Yeah.
And it's got,
Does it have a plug?
it has, yeah, it has a plug that folds out.
I think I should.
And so I can't power my laptop, but I can do everything else off the back. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a battery. It's so slow.
Yes.
Well, that's okay because.
Yeah.
So that's a lot.
Absolutely.
And on their side?
It has been a great appreciate. A lot of them, they're all great.
And then-
Yeah, we would have gotten there, but it would have been maybe not quite at the bottom. Well, that would come over.
I'll make him. So that's.
There you go.
Other than the.
Sure, actually allow.
They don't want to talk about, no gear not kicked off. Just. Most necessary.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
So what did you get? Nothing? Okay, let me check. Or is someone sick? What about? Yeah, she got the time. Good, she gonna show up for that? She said she's coughing. She's not contagious, but she's very. I thought that maybe that was not. That's what I meant.
We know what we ordered.
I have a list.
There's no way.
You
Right.
clearly have not met Julia.
Yes.
Turkey and avocado sandwich.
Nice.
Yeah, right there.
I order based on what I'm hungry for
In the
when I
box.
have to place the order.
And I didn't order.
But you, I got extra.
Can I even take?
It's only one Diet Coke that was ordered, and guess whose it was?
Well,
Michael ordered the Oriental, so extra this.
is that PC? I thought you were supposed to use that term.
Oriental, yeah, I didn't think that was a. Maybe when it comes to.
It's an object as opposed to a person.
Well, I'm not repeat this, I'm sure
Yeah.
I'll, isn't gonna want
I
to.
mean, it's sort of the problem.
She's
is,
not.
you know, you're oriental.
She said she's
Yeah.
not
An
confused.
oriental lunch as
Really
opposed
hard,
to
and it would have been disruptive.
a thing as opposed to an individual.
We're still gripping a whole lot of different
Yeah.
factors.
Pardon me?
Who? He's here. He's here. I don't know that he ordered.
Yeah, you ordered.
Oh, he must have just sent out.
Yeah, we should check this out. Can we turn this?
Oh, I might be finished.
I mean, I don't think we have.
That.
That's the one you're over there.